Let's get to the main event.
Yes, indeed.
So, do you want to introduce Quantum anymore? I'm going to read their bio from their website.
I think you should.
I am Quantum, a writer and software developer. I wrote There Is No Antimemetics Division, Raw, and Valuable Humans in Transit and Other Stories, the latter including the short stories Lena, The Difference, and I Don't Know, Timmy, Being God is a Big Responsibility. I'm enthusiastic about time zones, time travel, and calendars. These are all links, by the way, and I'm going to go follow them at the break. I think Unicode is the best thing in computers, and I believe that correctly structuring and normalizing data is an important social issue. Write that down. I was at one point the world authority on the true location of Springfield, and may still be the world authority on destroying the Earth. God, this is a great bio.
It really is.
If I appeared on Mastermind, my specialist subject would be Futurama. Hold on a second. I'm going to put here very shortly. I was Time Magazine's Person of the Year in 2006. That is a deep cut if you are my age. I created Absurdal. Oh, I hear laughing. This is good. This is good. Okay, let's just go ahead and switch over while I finish that. I created Absurdal, Hatress. I need to know what Hatress is. And Base 65536. I occasionally write programming tutorials. So welcome very much. So I got to not read it to Quantum. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. And I want to say, first of all, before we do anything else, thank you for your readings. I have enjoyed them a great deal. They have been, as you say, one story told well.
That's really sweet. Thank you so much. We had a fantastic time with the book. So I come very late into the SCP creepypasta kind of phenomenon. Grownard here. I think practically cut his. Do you need to scoot over a little bit?
I'm good.
You're a bit cropped off camera. I'm sorry. Cut his teeth on them, and I think the SCP hard copy RPG books are on our shelf in the other room. So I didn't know anything about it, and Alasdair was trying to explain it to me, and so I go poking around, and I think I found one of the Antimemetics short stories. I'm like, hey, this is really good. He's like, book! And I was like, oh, okay. So I start reading, and I'm like, I either need to finish this all tonight, or I need to commit to not sleeping. One of the two.
It is a short enough book that you can actually marathon it in a long evening.
Yeah,
it can be done. It's less than 300 pages, I think. So yeah.
But by the time I got further into it, I was like, no, I need to slow down. I need to savor this. This is very chewy. And then the character perspective started changing. And then I was like, wait, no. I need to start over. And then I started the book over and then finished it all the way through.
Mm-hmm. So the thing is, you probably read the book an extremely small number of days. It took me a lot longer than that to write. And you imagine the experience of reading it as it was coming out, with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months between chapters sometimes. But the point is, when it comes out slowly like that, everyone has the time to digest. They don't have a choice to digest and reflect. Yeah. Whereas when it's all in book form, it's just completely condensed. And I think it can hit a little harder.
We have several author friends in the chat, I know. And I know one of the common topics of conversation we have is the speed at which people inhale your creative product versus the speed at which you write it, and how that is both wonderful and infuriating.
Oh, yeah. I think for written fiction, it's actually not so bad. If you think about any movie and how many names show up in the credits at the end, this was 2 years of work for 1,500 people, and it's gone in 2 hours.
Exactly.
Yeah, or less. The numbers are very interesting for any work of creative fiction. I think the numbers are a little heartbreaking. How long it takes to produce versus how quickly it is to consume.
Do you ever find that influences your process of writing? Are you ever
Yes.
Oh, do you want to talk about that a bit more?
Yeah. So, when I'm writing serially, and I know that people have been waiting 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months for the next chapter, I'm like, well, I want to make this chapter count. I don't do filler. because I write very slowly, relatively speaking. A lot of people who do write much faster than I do. So I write
like
really slowly.
Shiny
So
Opals in the chat here, who knocks out these 60,000 word fan fictions in like seemingly days, like they were descended from the heavens and dropped on a doorstep.
Yeah, it's mad. I have a lot of respect for people who have that kind of work ethic and also the ability to just create quality text at that sort of speed. I have a lot of respect for that. I can't do that. So I try to make every chapter count. I try to make it dense. I try to make it so that there's a decent, hard story beat in every chapter so that I'm not wasting your time, you know?
Ask a question. I'm going to try to futz with something.
Trying to futz with something.
Yeah.
I am an immense structure nerd. I love how stories are built and stories are structured. And I'm curious as to how your process helped with how the story is structured. Because this is one of the most perfectly designed pieces of fiction from an architectural point of view I think I've ever encountered. And I'm really curious as to how many diagrams you had.
Well, okay, so thank you very much for the compliment. This isn't my first rodeo. This is my, let me get this right, fourth serial novel that I wrote basically chapter by chapter, publishing them to the web, with increasing degrees of readership and decreasing degrees of me having experience and knowing what I'm doing. So serial fiction is a whole different can of worms from just writing a novel. Because a novel, you write it, and you give it to an editor, and then you go back and change stuff. With serial fiction, once chapters 1 through 8 are out, you're done. You're locked in. If you made a bad decision in chapter 2, that's it. You're done. And Antimemetics is no exception. There's a bit in SCP-3125, which is a chapter, it's about halfway through the book. There's a monologue from Adam, which was very, very, very inconvenient later on. I wrote that, and I had to make it true because it's kind of a flash forward. I'm like, I'm completely locked into this, and I really wish I could change some of this, but like hundreds and hundreds of people have read it already, so I'm stuck.
It becomes almost like soap opera writing or like EastEnders writing. It's like, it's the improvers, yes, and you can never say no, but you just have to build on top.
No, you're very limited in what you can go back and edit retrospectively. So there's a ton of forward planning. And yes, I got a huge directory over here full of notes and rewrites and well, okay, I'm going to show you. This is kind of an Easter egg, but if you go to my website, go to quantum.org/scp, scroll down a bit, you're going to find some deleted scenes. You're going to find some stuff that I omitted. Now, every single one of these scenes was removed for a good reason. And some of them you're going to read and you're going to go, I see why that's not in there. That makes no sense, or that doesn't contribute anything, or that's just rubbish. But you will get some insight into my creative process and why the story went in some directions but not in other directions.
Nice.
So there's that. So that's one of the reasons that takes me so long, is a whole lot of second guessing, a whole lot of writing something and going, you know what, this is wrong. Let's cross it all out, start over.
Or writing it and then having to think not just about like what's immediately before it and what's immediately next, but what is significantly before it and significantly next.
Yeah, it's kind of like trying to, I'm not sure if this is a good analogy, but it's kind of trying to land on the moon. You know where the moon is, roughly, and you want to land on the moon somewhere. There isn't a specific crater you're aiming at. I know that isn't how it actually works when you're trying to really land on the moon. But
when you're playing Outer Wilds and you want to land on the planet,
there's almost literally an arc, and you'll rise to the top of that story arc, and you go, right, I know roughly where I want this to land. I know roughly, like, emotionally where we want to be towards the conclusion. What open threads are in progress right now? What are the satisfactory ways to wrap these up? What should be the last one? What should be the second to last one? And a lot of it kind of guides itself to that point. So a lot of it is just forward planning and experience from having written serials and gotten completely stuck towards the end of that serial and gone, wow, I made a bunch of really bad decisions here and now I can't really do a good ending. Well, I just have to do the best ending possible under the circumstances. So a lot of this is just experience. The other aspect of it which guided the way this works is the nature of the SCP Wiki itself. Unlike something like AO3, which is heavily organized around like serialized stories that are published chapter by chapter by chapter, and people keep up with that. The normal way in which most people interact with the SCP Wiki is they just browse. They kind of dip in and out. They go to most recent pages and just click something at random.
That's what I did. Yeah,
exactly,
absolutely.
Exactly. So your reader experience is the one that I was thinking about mostly when I was writing this. And that experience is one where you're going to dive in and you're going to hit chapter 7. And chapter 7 is no use to you by itself. And if it says at the top, this is chapter 7, you're going to go, oh, I'm not reading this. I can't be bothered to read 6 other chapters. You might jump back to chapter 1, or you might not, or you might just go and find something else. So if you look carefully, you'll see probably, I'd say like 60, 70% of this book can just be read as a single chapter by itself.
Oh my God,
right. Yeah. And that's it's really interesting you raise that, because I'm a short fiction editor by background, and one of the number one things you always talk about to authors when they are submitting short fiction is that chapters of novels rarely stand alone sufficiently as a short story. You know, they're designed to be interlinked. Yep. They have dependencies on other portions of the broader narrative. And I think that is one of the reasons I found this book so compelling in a brand new to me like genre was, okay, that was discrete and I understand what happened, but I desperately need more. And what I'm about to get is more, but not linearly necessarily. It's like, okay, now I have a piece of the world building, which is changing my perspective on the original content. And now as I go forward, I have a third perspective. I'm almost like triangulating a story in the intersections of all these particular discrete narratives.
That's almost exactly, that's exactly what I was sort of aiming for. And I think
it's almost also writing a negative space, right?
Yeah. The nature of, I think, with a lot of writing is that you create more than you put on the page. Even with linear writing, even with just a plain novel set in some sort of fictional world, you're going to work out more of the novel than is actually shown on the page, because this allows the things to be kind of consistent around the edges. It avoids you running headlong into really dumb contradictions later down the road. So the same is true of any one chapter of these. Is I write one chapter and like, there's a lot to that chapter that I didn't bother to put in there. I worked it out. I've got it in my notes, and some of those notes came up in later chapters, but other parts of it I intentionally didn't work out until later when I needed to.
Part of the mystique of the world building is like, how much of it do you put on the page? How much of it is the 3 weeks you spent figuring out that one thing to make that one line in the book that nobody's going to appreciate right now, but
you will.
And every time you read it, you're like, I got it right. And then everybody else is like, oh, okay, that was cool, I guess. But the response is out of context based on, what it took to get there in the first place.
Yes, a lot of my writing process is going like, okay, well, this person gets thrown out of a window. What kind of window? 2.5 hours on Wikipedia learning how the history of defenestration, assassination, and how sash windows are constructed. And I get to the end of it, go, well, that was very informative. But the answer is, yes, I can have this person get thrown out of this window. That's okay. All I've learned is I can write 6 more words. Was that a constructive use of time? Maybe. But yes. But the other thing is, for this particular story, because each chapter can kind of be read out of context, because the characters in the story are also grappling with that exact same problem. They're coming into a situation with no memory of the scene, the chapter before, or idea of what the chapter after might be. And they make the best guess they can, given what they know. And to a certain extent, you as the reader, you also don't know whether they're making a good guess or not. But also, to a certain extent, you've seen the flash forward or the flashback, and you have some dramatic irony there because you know where they're going, or you have an inkling of whether this is going to work or not.
Exactly.
So that, by the way, it's a complete coincidence that thematically this serves the serial format, but it did serve it really well.
But sorry, I will let you talk in a moment. I'm talking now. But it is part of. I love it when the prose and the genre and the format are all self-reinforcing like that, because I think it intensifies the immersion of the experience, and engaging with prose is already, metatext theory, and you bring as much to the story as any person can when they interact with the text. So the final product of the experience is a sum of what the reader brings and what the author brings. But when all of those things are so, Swiss watch lined up, it really intensifies, and I think maybe reinforces the creator's vision in a way, because it is, that funnel is so much steeper. You're having the experience of having to fill some of the gaps yourself, and that being an experience the character is having. And so you're having it through their eyes and also experiencing it at the same time. It just intensifies things, which I really love.
Thank you.
It's very cool.
At least partially intentional.
Style it out. Yes, I totally meant to do that. Yes, for sure. I love that.
The point I was going to make actually speaks directly to that, to your earlier point about how each chapter stands alone. And I think that leads to some really very powerful resonance that just kind of runs up and down the text. The chapter where Adam, where someone breaks into Wheeler's house, and by the end of it you realize it's Adam, and she has excised him from her life. That is a fantastic short story in its own right. But not just that story, but the shape of the wound that is left in Adam's head becomes such a defining part of the second half of the book because of that structure. Because you feel the compartmentalization he does. And that's fiercely smart.
And just now sitting here thinking about it and you reminding us about that early chapter, my brain is like, so where does that fit? Was that it had to have been after the barbecue, but it feels almost like I want to know how much of a gap it was. And it had to have been years, but it felt really raw. Again, because of that kind of disconstructed narrative element of things.
Yeah, generally, when I've written 6 chapters and I'm trying to figure out the 7th chapter, what I'm looking for is like, okay, what is the next logical story beat? Here's a different analogy, different from landing on the moon. It's like trying to cross a big lake. There's a bunch of stepping stones, and at any given point, there are 3 or 4 other stepping stones that I could step to. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, which would be the most dramatic one to step to? What's the most dramatic piece of information to reveal next? And one of them would, I got to the point right before the chapter you just mentioned, Alasdair, where I went, okay, well, the next thing to do would be to explain what happened to her husband. That would be the obvious next thing to go for. So I went there. And then what's next after that? Well, actually, the middle of that chapter was supposed to be a flashback, but then that flashback grew so large, I went, okay, this flashback is now the next chapter instead. Because the two of them can be read in isolation, in theory.
Yes, they can. Yeah.
So I just split them into 2 chapters, and that worked.
Is that the chapter where she's going to find the old leader of the organization, and he gets
so the first chapter is Where Have You Been All My Life, which is when Adam Wheeler discovers that his wife's memory has been erased off him. And the chapter after that is Fresh Hell, which is how they originally met, which is when they find a monster who...
The X-Files reference on the roof, yes.
Yes, it gets a little bit X-Files.
The world's most profoundly terrifying meat cube.
Yeah, literally MEAT.
Oh, dearie me. You got there a second before I did. I was going to say that. Yeah.
Oh,
no, it's gross.
Love a graphic meat cube.
So I'll tell you another thing. So that particular SCP, the one which is horror alert, there's a bunch of disembodied fingers all colonizing a hospital ward. That particular SCP is a good monster for like an episode of the X-Files or for this chapter of the story. For the SCP wiki itself, probably wouldn't work that well, because you just write it down and you'd read it and go, well, this is just a bunch of fingers. There isn't much of a story here, which is something I felt able to do in this story, because SCPs should stand alone, and an SCP should have a narrative through line to it, like in its own right, But some of the SCPs in my story are not, don't have that function. They have a different narrative function, which is to put my character, to provide an inciting backdrop for my characters to meet one another.
And that's a whole nother aspect of this, is like a genre, right? Because probably my first, I would say, like contemporaneous exposure to SCP creepypasta general concept stuff is, or at least the one that sticks out in my head most, is Control, the video game.
Have you played that?
Yes, okay. I've watched him play it all the way through.
Right.
How about that?
Good.
So, and we are both horror fiction, genre fiction background people. So we came into something that looked kind of creepy and a little weird with, ooh, where's the Ooga Booga, where's the scary monster kind of aspect of it. And it's so interesting to me that there's like a hair's breadth between contemporary creepypasta representations like Control or Antimemetics and horror, but that they're on the almost the non-graphic side of the line, the non-creaturey, horribly side of the way. It's that concept of horror that you like so much, which is your imagination will always fill in a scarier monster than anything we could actually put on the screen.
Oh yeah. So I'm glad you brought this up, because Control is a very important game to me. It's one I played, like 100%ed it, and I actually have an essay on the game Control from my perspective as someone who's written a lot for the SCP Wiki, which I'm going to link in your chat now.
Brilliant.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, I'm totally opening that up right now.
One of the things I'm going to call out there is like Control and SCP and the X-Files and what just happened?
You're all good. I fixed it. I opened the tab in the wrong browser window. We're good.
Control and SCP and the X-Files and let's say Warehouse 13 and Men in Black all kind of have a very similar common core, which is it's a paranormal procedural. There are werewolves and monsters that bump in the night and someone bumps back.
But it's also serial in that it is mystery of the week, episodic, nothing changes, maintain the status quo. Exactly.
But the key difference between all of these is what the purpose that the monster serves. So in a game like Control, each new anomaly, it needs to be some kind of game mechanic or challenge or puzzle or boss or enemy. In something like the X-Files, it needs to be a monster of the week. In Men in Black, it needs to be the alien of the week. In SCP, well, it can be pretty much anything, but it needs to work as a piece of text, like as a standalone document, and it's written. I mean, there are visual elements you can do in the SCP Wiki, but all of these purposes are different things that you can take, like in the paranormal. You can take a paranormal phenomenon, and these are different narrative functions. So a monster that works really well as like a D&D monster or as an X-Files monster doesn't work on the SCP Wiki. And or might not, and a lot of the monsters in Control wouldn't work as SCPs at all.
Because
and a lot of what I've written doesn't work in a visual format because they're so cerebral. It's all mental and abstract.
Right. It's medium dependent for some of the experiential elements. It's interesting that you talk about that because one of my favorite growing trends on TikTok, at least as far as our TikTok is concerned, is SCP and creepypasta. It's people trying to do short-form visual engagement with some of these longer-standing either graphic fine art things, Siren Head's a classic example, or prose-driven examples of creepypasta experiments. And I think video games have really hit that middle ground sweet spot because they have interactive elements, they have textual elements, they have three-dimensional interactivity in a way that can play with a lot more of those elements. I mean, Control is one of the best video games in the entire world, as far as I'm concerned. It was so good. The heavy metal level where you put your headphones on will live forever in infamy. It is so good. I loved it so much. After finally making my way through that damn maze. But there's just a way that the transmission of the transmission medium really plays an effect on things like this. Because you look at movies like Pontypool, one of his all-time favorites, which is again about mimetic transference and how the visual elements and the auditory elements of that work in a film.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly. And the thing is, from a writer, from my perspective, at the back end of of trying to create for these media, like the medium itself informs all kinds of decisions in terms of what I'm going to put down there. I wrote this book to be like text. And there's a lot of it that doesn't. There are a lot of semi-licit adaptations of SCPs, on YouTube and stuff like this, and some of them work. and some of them are anti-memetics related, and in my view, a lot of them don't really work. Like as a reading, that works great. That's just that's just straight narration. That works quite well. But I think actually you found a couple of times there's some screwy formatting in this, which doesn't really read out very well. That's because I'm thinking text first, and I'm thinking about you guys. I'm sorry.
It's fine.
It doesn't. Someone in chat saying they could not do SCP-3125 as a TikTok. I think it's been tried, but no, they couldn't. It doesn't work. It just doesn't have that aspect.
Or I think it could, but what it would have to do in a visual and in an auditory format is push that one kind of boundary that auditory and visual formats don't do well, and which the human psyche really rebels against, and that is second person. The idea that you have to kind of start getting... I'm thinking specifically about that season 5 Magnuson episode with the merry-go-round with the doctor, where it's being narrated from the perspective of you are the patient experiencing the events of the story, and how that was one of the very few 200 episodes of the Magnus Archives that made me go, ooh, nope, I don't think I can engage with this one. And it's because there's something about that second person perspective that really... Again, I think it's psychologically designed to get our hackles up, because it is telling us through our senses what we are experiencing, even though we are not experiencing it.
Yes. I've never written in second person.
I was going to ask you that.
Writing in second person is it's actually a really difficult thing to do. First person is very popular. Third person is what I do most of the time. Let me ask you this. Did you notice that this entire thing was written in the present tense?
Yeah,
I did, and I it's one of the things I caught when I got about a third of the way through and went, wait, no, I need to start over, and I was like, these are flashbacks. I know that from my brain is stitching together a narrative timeline perspective, but the tensing is all in the moment.
Yeah, I've been writing in present tense for basically forever. All my novels are in the present tense. That's because one of my influences is comic books. Or comic books with narration, particularly Grant Morrison's JLA from the 1990s.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, which is ridiculously fast-paced, widescreen kind of... You read it and you go, oh, now I see why a lot of people like the Justice League. It's because these are the most gigantic threats. They're solving 200 of them in a single issue. It's just nuts. But it's all narrated first person. And I like that immediacy, and I like putting you in the moment, and it doesn't feel like... It feels like the future is a little harder to grasp, a little harder to see. Because when you write in the past tense, you're like, well, obviously there is a future of some kind. But if you write in the present tense, like the future is a little more uncertain. It feels like it's real.
Yeah.
So I like that. I like writing in the present tense.
Capitalism is asserting itself. So we are going to take a little 2-minute break here, folks. And when we come back, I want to pick up on this point about first person perspective and what it changes about the perceived threat profile of the narrative as well, because you brought up comic books as an example. And I think you are, as a reader, in a very different emotional space, maybe, when you're engaging with a first-person narrative versus a third-person narrative, or a past-tense narrative specifically. Cool. So we'll be right back, everybody. Get up and get yourselves a wiggle. We will let capitalism do its thing, and we will continue this glorious conversation. We'll be right back.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And we're back.
And we're back. We were talking about the typographical representation of the novel in different formats, and how the Kindle version that I was reading off of had them as squares, and Alasdair's version, which I think was just a PDF or something, or maybe even from the website, I'm not sure, was showing them differently. Okay, so I wanted to go back to this point we were talking about right before the break, that you mentioned JLA comics were one of your big influences, and writing in present tense. And the point I wanted to ask you about is, like, I find that when I'm engaging with a present tense narrative, the emotional stakes are higher, because when you talk to some extent in past tense, some part in the back of my brain goes, well, this has already happened and somebody lived to tell the tale. So the threat isn't necessarily the same level. And is that an intentional choice, or is it just, has it been a stylistic choice that you find it easier to write that way?
It was an intentional choice, but it was an intentional choice from a long time ago. So my first novel were things I've been writing for a long time, but I didn't start writing for the web until some years ago. But my first novel, which is called Ed, which I feel like my novels have been getting slowly better over time, was originally written on a site called Everything 2, and it was written in the form of like diary entries, like phony diary entries. So like, here's what I did today. Today, Ed and I did this. Today, Ed and I did that. And it was written kind of in the present tense because that was the logical voice to be writing in. And I just kind of kept writing in that tense because it just sort of worked. And I felt that I was something that I was reasonably adept at. And also it's something that most people don't. I mean, not in prose, at least. But the other aspect of it is I really like writing action sequences. And there is nothing better for an action sequence than present tense.
Yeah.
I say that I write really slowly. Are we dropping behind on the auto captioning?
I think so. That's what I'm taking a second to do.
Should I stop speaking for a moment, or let you?
I'm not quite sure what's going on. It seems to be
Is it captioning the future?
I mean, it could be. It seems to be capturing me at the moment, but not you. So I was thinking, why don't you go ahead and talk for a second, and let's see if it catches back up.
I write really slowly, but action sequences in particular take me even longer than ever because I edit like crazy. It's like, I feel like it's similar to what happens when you're in a film editing room and you're editing a real action sequences, because it's all about pacing. And you were talking earlier about how some people just devour a book super fast. But if you assume that a human being, a reader, reads at a roughly fixed rate of words per minute,
150 to 165.
Sure, very good. I didn't know that. I was not.
I do,
but thank you. Great, but
that's how we calculate total story length for the podcast narrations.
Nice.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's about between 50 and 165.
Cool, but that means that you can spend 165 words talking about 1 second of action, or you can spend 165 words talking about a minute of action, and depending on how long a word you pick or how long a sentence you choose to use, every sentence break is like a cut. Every paragraph break is a cut. It's all editing. Going backwards and backwards and backwards and over again, saying, does this flow properly? Is like geometrically, is it obvious where everything is in space and what's happening? And I love just editing action down so that I can get it really crisp and effective, so that I can communicate precisely what's happening as clearly as possible using exactly the right pacing, so that fast things happen in a small number of words and slow things happen over a long number of words and stuff like this. But present tense is perfect for action. It's great.
Nice.
It's really interesting that you say that, because that's a technique I've seen start to spread out quite fast. And kind of from a visual point of view in kind of two different ways. What you're talking about feels a lot to me like the prose equivalent of the way the John Wick movies do action, in that it's given space so you can understand what's going on, but at the same time, that space is keyed very closely to speed of action and speed of response. And
there is a crispness to it, which...
Exactly.
I mean, it speaks both to like the tight nature of the planning, but it also speaks to character, I think. For example, Marion is the sort of person who goes into a fight like John Wick. She knows exactly what she wants to accomplish with a minimum of risk and a maximum of effect. And so that like narrative style contributes and keeps you immersed in that sense of character. And I think I found later on, like, it was kind of a pivot point. It wasn't so much that Adam was describing action sequences, but Adam was describing the travel and the environmental impact and how that had a very different, like, mindset about how, he was very caught up in this is wrong and I just have to do it. Where, he's having a very experiential processing situation, whereas Marion's like, I want to get this done and this thing's weak here and I can hit it like this, and if I miss I have to do that.
Adam's very good at not dying.
Not even intentionally. You get the impression.
So you just hit a bunch of things, and I want to address, not address, but I want to respond to as many of them as I can remember. In terms of John Wick, so I mean, there is a case to be made that a long single take, of which there are many in the John Wick movies, a long single take is kind of like a run-on sentence. In the terms of like, as time goes on, the tension builds. Is like, where is this ending? Where is this ending? Eventually, it cuts, but then there's another cut. You're right that some movies don't have very good action because you don't get a sense of the geometry, because of the way the camera is placed and the way the cuts are positioned. Like, you can't actually tell what's happening.
Yeah,
I think there's at least one of the Nolan Batman films which has a real problem with that kind of thing, where it's just kind of a blur. And on the one hand, that's an intentional creative choice because fighting Batman is supposed to be extremely confusing. But on the other hand, it does feel like something of an error compared to something like Mad Max Fury Road, which deliberately always puts the action in the middle of the shot, so that your eye doesn't have to move around all that much. So that is also true. I think it's very important to communicate clearly what's happening in your action. Another thing you mentioned was like action reveals character. The way people behave in an action sequence, but also just in generic narrative, but also in movies is, and there, I actually find this quite problematic sometimes, is that you have an action sequence just for the sake of the action. But action should reveal character. Like a story beat should be hit over the course of this fight, right? We should discover something that someone can do or can't do, or that they want to do or they don't want to do. Like, it doesn't have to be a big thing, but the fight should serve a purpose.
My favorite example of this is in one of the later episodes of the She-Hulk TV show. There's a fight where Jen is meeting Daredevil, and they are both involved in the fight. And he does this ridiculous acrobatic get down to the floor thing, and she just jumps and lands. And there's so much communicated in that little tiny beat of mindset and threat profile and experience level. It was just very neatly done that I think it speaks to that example.
Absolutely. Well, another thing is, so believe it or not, there's like Marion Wheeler, yes, is very calculating. I think you and I are actually already aware of this, but I have written some SCP Control crossover fan fiction.
Oh no, it's going on our list of next things to read.
It's going on the list. Good. Like, let me know when you get around to that. But I wanted to write that because I wanted to just write some action sequences with Marion, and she does more fighting in that than she does in the book that we're talking about right now. But we go into more detail about exactly how Marion Wheeler fights. And I'm not going to spoil anything, but I'm going to quote a line here, is that for Marion Wheeler, combat is nearly always combat with a physically superior opponent. She's not that tall, and she doesn't have superpowers. She's very well trained, but for her, combat is primarily about avoiding combat. So she's going to, like, if she can win, she's going to win pretty fast. If she can't, she's going to run away, hide, improvise, cheat. And you do see that happen.
And there's no such thing as cheating when you are vastly outgassed.
Maybe I cheated, but only one of us is alive. So,
right.
Precisely. Them's the breaks.
They become gimmick fights, almost like puzzle fights. Like, my objective is not physical confrontation. It is to accomplish something that's going to put me in a better position, whether that's, casting the spell or getting the hell away. It doesn't matter what that thing is. She's
got an objective. Compare with Adam Wheeler, who is not a fighter. Like, he would go, like, at one point during this book in ANTIMEMETICS, he acquires a gun, and he doesn't know what to do with the gun. You know, he can point it and fire it, but he's like, this is a liability. I'm going to blow my own foot off.
Mm-hmm.
And he's scared of his own weapon, you know, because
but
the
he
nature
has
of
that
his life is that he's never really had to fight.
But he has that
his ordeal.
assumption that he knows he's in a physically threatened position, and this is what his own experience has told him should be a tool for his own safety. But he's also, you know, critical and knowledgeable of enough of himself to say, I do not have the skills, and this is more of a liability than an advantage.
He hasn't been trained.
His exhausted, permanently traumatized pragmatism is just so good. That moment in particular with the gun, I got this really clear mental image of him just looking at it the way, like, and it's almost Peter Capaldi-like way of, what am I doing? You know? And it speaks to your point of how action speaks to character. And the fact that he knows himself so well, and he knows what he's capable of and what he isn't, resonates very strongly with his job as a professional survivor in the back half of the story.
Yeah.
There was one other thing I wanted to mention about actually character. When I'm narrating, like when I'm writing the actions of one character or the other, my narration starts to sometimes look like that character's internal monologue almost. When I'm narrating Marion moving, then I'm going to narrate that in one way. When I'm narrating Adam moving, I'm going to narrate that in a different way because his thought processes are different. The things he's dwelling on and talking and looking at. But like, this is omniscient third person. But the omniscient third person will start using particular phrases that perhaps Marion wouldn't.
But that's exactly the reason, I think that in particular is exactly the reason why we were drawn to narrate this. Is because we work in audio fiction. And the secret sauce of audio fiction is communicating character in prose in a way that is enhanced by performance. And those, you know, it's vocabulary choices, it's pacing, it's worldview, it's the perception and the description of the same events through two different pairs of eyes makes for compelling audio presentation. And so that is very much a feature. That and it's scary as hell, and this audience loves scary as hell things, is why we went, oh yeah, that one's a winner. We definitely need to perform that one. So thank you very much, by the way, for letting us do so. This has been delightful.
My pleasure.
Terrifying, but delightful. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah,
I will be here forever if we just keep going.
I've got all the time in the world. I can keep going if you want.
Yeah, that's true.
I am completely fascinated by the element of, by the way that the structure you use and the typographical tricks that you employ mean that the book itself becomes an extrusion of 3125. And
I loved that sigh. That was good. That was very good.
That is, I think you may be one of a very small amount of people who crack the code of how to do 21st century cosmic horror. Because that subversion of format and that use of format as narrative delivery system is incredibly difficult to do. And it's even harder to do in a way that looks very logical and simple.
And not like artifice or shtick.
Precisely.
Right?
And I wanted to circle back around to something I think you mentioned in chat a couple of weeks back, which was the section where Adam is overtaken by 3125. You get little pieces of the prose. And how that, from my perspective, felt like that is him clawing his way back to the surface for a second and then being dragged back under. How you said you'd actually written that paragraph.
Oh, and I won't. I
story.
do and do not want to read it, right?
Okay. So again, like you said a bunch of really interesting stuff. So first of all, like the use of redaction specifically, like, and so the use of like CIA style
black bars,
documents, like that's normal. This is a thing that once you're floating around the SCP wiki for a while, this just becomes normal. You use redaction. Sometimes you write text saying data expunged, and sometimes you use the black bars. But I used like the black bars because that was the logical place to go, because it can be used as a symbol as well. And because I can fool around with that. I can redact large chunks of text and have a particular effect. It's one of these things. This is what I've said this. I said this in one or two other places, but something that's very normal for you as a sort of small subculture of creators might be a novel new taste outside of your subculture. Something like this use of redaction here it just kind of came fairly naturally to me, because this is just how we write on the SCP wiki.
Mhm.
But outside of the wiki, people are like, that's neat. I haven't seen that before.
Girl on the train, when all of a sudden the world realized what an unreliable narrator was. And those of us in prose have been there forever, right?
Yes, indeed. What else was I going to say? Yes, so this bit that's completely redacted, one of the deleted scenes bonus features on my website is the non-redacted version of this. And this does, in fact, merit a content warning. It's very violent. Read with care. If you're not up for it, like, you're going to get half a paragraph into this and you go, ooh, this maybe isn't for me. But maybe it is. It's up to you. But consider yourself warned.
There is another
warning at the top of the thing itself saying, like, this is the most violent thing in SCP.
Ozzy, the movie was based on the original novel Girl on the Train, yes. And the big reveal that had everybody all like, oh, this is so innovative, was an unreliable narrator, which people who read genre fiction have been aware of unreliable narrators forever.
The overwhelming response was, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Welcome to the club. Here, I got a stack of recommendations. Start here, right? Exactly.
So, but the thing is, like, HTML is my bread and butter as well. So anytime I'm doing fixed width text or just playing with the text sizes or the alignments, like, it's a very small thing, but it's a thing that you can do very easily on the wiki, and which I think is relatively rarely seen in prose fiction.
We're getting into kind of like the House of Leaves territory, where the physical representation and presentation of the text also contributes to the narrative in a way.
But lastly, I think that having the thing have a symbol, which is this gigantic tombstone symbol, and then having you turn the page and there it is, occupying the entire page.
I think I would have screamed and thrown the book if that had been the case.
I think in book form it works better, but it does work pretty well, I think, on the web as well, where you just scroll down, there it is. There's a bunch of jump scary stuff that you can do on the SCP wiki, which is completely impractical in text, in print.
But all this is making me think now is, when are we going to get like a fantastic hardcover illustrated version of this? Like, can you imagine this is a comic?
Oh my goodness.
It could be done. However, I mean, that's a serious adaptation, right?
Right.
The nature of comics is, like, a comic is always a collaboration. Well, it's nearly always a collaboration between, like, a writer and one or more artists.
Exactly.
The visual component of this story, I think it does have some visual components, but it would need much more in terms of visual components. Like, there would need to be some creation done, some serious changes would need to be overhauled.
And of course, the downside of that is you lose what the reader brings to the experience element of it in a universal fashion. And like, my favorite example for this is, I both do and do not hope there was ever a Mass Effect movie, because I love the Mass Effect video games very much. But in order to do that sort of transcribed presentation, you have to make canonical linear decisions, which will exclude the original experience of a lot of people's playthroughs of the game. Another example that I'm really looking forward to seeing how this works is Stephen Colbert is going to be producing a new television series based on the Roger Zelazny Princes of Amber books, which were my very first introduction to genre fiction, one of my very first ones. And there's been a comic book, and there's been a couple of other attempts to kind of take this enormous liminal world and transcribe it into a physical visual medium that I'm both like fascinated and terrified by. Yeah. Kind of like, I'm sure all the Robert Jordan fans were about the Wheel of Time TV show. It's like, how was that adaptation going to take not only a gigantic world and a lot of characters, but the like almost meta level of experience of its fans around it, and then push that down into the visual form. There's just so much that by definition has to be lost. But then again, you could have a Witcher situation where a lot was gained as well from
Yep.
the stylistic choices that were made and how the narrative was presented and altered to be in a television show, as opposed to the very Slavic novels, very different presentation style.
Yeah, there's always, like, when any medium shift like that, it's always a really dicey value proposition. There's always a lot that simply will not transfer over. I discovered stuff that wouldn't transfer over. I mean, on the SCP wiki itself, here's a good example. On the SCP wiki itself, if you go to the entry for SCP-3125, unlike in the book, when you start reading it, there's just a bunch of text, and then there's a keypad. And that's it. It says end of file, and then there's a keypad. And unless you know the code, you can't read the rest of that. But the code is extremely easy to figure out. Or if you ask me or Google online, or it's actually hidden on the page very obviously, where you go, oh, there's the code right there, and you just enter it, and that's the code. But that interactive element, I couldn't do that in print.
Right.
Obviously, I couldn't put that in the ebook form. So obviously, a little is always lost.
But then we had, what was it called? Bandersnatch?
The Black Mirror interactive movie,
It's more interactive movie. So, I mean, we're starting to edge up to that creepy Fahrenheit 451 writing you into the serial on the three walls of your television scenario, where you do have that what mechanisms are being developed for the interactivity of fiction. But of course, then there are limits to that, because you've got to produce all the various options, and then studios start doing nasty AI things, and we have to say no. And yeah, we're not quite there yet, but it's very fascinating how we're getting there.
So there is a lot to be lost, and there's a lot to be gained, and you've got to make sure that the trade-off is worth it, I think, in any adaptation.
Yeah,
that's the deal.
Very much so. I think this might be a good chance for our chat to start thinking about if they have some questions. We have one from before that we'll get started with, I think, and then we'll give the moderators some time to collect a couple questions. So one of the things that's been asked in previous streams about this book in particular are the difficulties and the opportunities for creating in a shared universe, and such a big one as the phenomenon that is SCP. Like, how did you always know, look, I want to write in this world, or were you involved with it in an earlier format that quite literally SCP has been formulated around some of your work?
It has. Right. Okay. So let me give you the executive summary of how this works. So the SCP Wiki started around 2007, 2008. In the very, very early days, this would have been July 2008, I wrote a very early first series SCP, SCP-055. That's the one that's the self-keeping secret. That's the very first chapter of the book. It's the prologue of the book. I wrote that because I was reading the existing SCPs, of which there were probably only a few hundred at the time, which is hard to believe now, but there were only a few hundred of them at the time. And I looked at them and I went, okay, there are no mimetic SCPs. There are no SCPs that are like massive contagious ideas, or like are figurative, are conceptual. So I went, okay, what would a mimetic SCP look like? And I came up with SCP-055. And that was it. So that was, I think I coined the term antimemetics in there somewhere, or I might have done, I don't know. And then I put that in there because at the time, the SCP Wiki was literally a wiki. It was a media wiki installation, and people would routinely edit other people's entries. That was it didn't really have a lot of structure to it. So I wrote the first half of SCP-055, and if you look at the article as it is currently, the second half of it is by someone else. It doesn't say it's by someone else, but it is. It's by Captain Bellman, I think is that person's username, and they are long since missing. I don't know who they are. I've never spoken with them personally. But partially because of that, only my half of it is what actually goes into the Kindle edition and the print editions, because I was not able to contact this other person and secure that permission. And yeah, so I only put my half of that in there. But I wrote that and then left the wiki for several years and worked on several other things. I wrote another book and a half, I think. I wrote my book, Ra would have been that time, which took several years. And then, but all that, in most of that time, like I still had this idea kicking around. It's like, yeah, anti-memes. There's more here. There's more here. 2015, I came back and started writing Antimemetics. Like I
You
wrote one
came
chapter.
back and you're like, what is all of this? Oh my God. It's like throwing 2 wire coat hangers in a closet and shutting the door.
Yeah, it was a completely different thing. I had to go, hey, can I re-register, please? Because you've moved site now. You're on a completely different installation. Yes, I am an old user. Can you grandfather me in? But so I was kind of familiar with the SCP wiki from a very early time in the wiki's existence. But basically, I view it as a kind of a platform. One of the most useful things about this is that explicitly there is no canon on the SCP wiki. It's okay to directly contradict someone else's SCP, which is a good thing because there are 7,000 of them now, and you can't be expected to read them all and keep them straight. That would be insane. So as long as you understand the basics, you can just kind of build on top of that. And those basics are very familiar. They're very X-Files, as we've mentioned. It's like very much like Control. Like, yeah, you can handle those basics very easily. So yes, that is what happened. And I spent several years writing Antimemetics in 2 large parts. Like part 1, the first half of the book, I wanted to do that in I wanted to tell a complete story in 1 year. So I took most of 2015. I spent writing that. And then I went away and went, yeah, I can do a second half of this. And I wrote that second half over the course of another 2.5 years. I think it's horrifying amount of time. No, longer, much longer.
Don't do math like that. It starts to get scary.
I write really slowly. I write slower than most people. But yes.
All right. Another question we've got from the chat. What is an SCP that you would have loved or have wanted to put into Antimemetics but didn't? So I'm guessing 055 was one of them. But
the second half of, actually, I'm kind of okay with leaving the second half off. But the thing is, for the book, I wanted it to be entirely my own creation, mostly. There are references to other SCPs. So, for example, SCP-1425 is referenced pretty heavily. That was huge inspiration on all of this, actually. And if you go to the web, you go to the wiki, you go to the Antimemetics Division hub, you'll find many other items of precursor work that are very similar or were inspirational to me. Let me have a look here. Oh, so there's one called SCP-2828, which is actually quite interesting. Should I say what that was about?
I think it'll be fine since we're talking about Wikipedia entry SCPs, I think it'd be fine if we talked about it.
There's a very famous one, I think it was SCP-2521, which you would have a really hard time narrating because it's purely pictorial. There are no words. It was originally created for a kind of a brevity competition. So this person won the brevity competition by virtue of having 0 words or pictures. But It is an SCP which, if documented or spoken about, comes and gets you. So it has to be documented entirely pictorially. And I thought it would be very interesting to use that to escape from somewhere. Be like, well, you think I've locked in this jail cell, but here is a detailed verbal description of SCP-142521, and it comes and gets you and you disappear. Now, where you are now is something of a question. And the thing is, this is someone else's SCP, and I didn't want to just tread on their toes, and it's a very well-regarded SCP. I didn't want to bend it in a way that I wanted to bend it. I wanted to leave it to be there on that person's property. So yeah,
I love it, and I love the idea. I'm thinking about it in terms of one of my favorite all-time comic books ones, which was the Pizza Dog point of view episode of Hawkeye, which is told in the entire comic is from the dog's point of view, and it is all pictograms. That's how the dog communicates. And there was a recent shark one.
Jeff the Shark
did a similar thing where I think it was with a space dog. I can't remember who the shark was with, but there was someone else he was communicating with in images.
It's a group of kittens who he scares off the back of the fish shop and then feels bad about it and shares his fish with the kittens.
I see. But again, that was the first time I ever encountered how the dog thinks he identifies a particular location by the combination of the trash can and the pizza next door and the oil from the slick and things like that. But that kind of pictographic language is what this SCP you were just talking about reminds me of.
Yes, very much so.
Really cool. All right, we've got a question from grim. How do you feel when you see now other SCP creators building on or using your story and your original? For example, 6820, a loot makes a reference to 3125.
I have no problem with that at all. That is part of the contract, as it were. That's contract in scare quotes, obviously. When you engage with the wiki, you are building on other people's work, and other people are going to build on your work. There are things in the wiki, like I mentioned, 1425, which gets kind of referenced offhand a couple of times during the story. So yeah, that's completely fine. I don't have a lot of input into those continuations. From my perspective, Antimemetics, it was designed as and is a completed story.
Mm-hmm.
The narrative is concluded.
But so much more is implied. Anyway, okay.
The more is implied, but not there isn't. The more story isn't necessarily implied.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's more like world elements is implied.
Yeah. So I'm okay with people taking this in different directions as long as they do well with it.
Sounds very cool. We have a lot of writers in the chat, like I said, and one of them has asked if you have any general advice for somebody who is in the process of developing their craft with writing work like this or speculative in nature.
Yes, I do. You go to my author page on the SCP Wiki, scroll down, you will find a section called Quantum's One Weird Tip for Writing. Now, I don't know what level of experience you're at this point, but if you're just getting started, then the most important thing is to finish work.
Yeah.
Don't write chapter 1 of a novel, write a short story that's 1 chapter long. And because it's important to get to the end. Starting things doesn't count. You've got to get to the end. And it's okay for a story to be short. Like, word count is a fake idea. Like, if the best you can manage is a haiku, like, that's okay. A haiku is a complete work, but you've got to complete your work because that's the only way you can practice endings, and that's the only way you can have proper discipline.
Yeah.
So good luck.
100%.
Nice. Thank you very much.
If you get halfway through something and you give up, that's great. Write another story that's half as long.
Yeah. No, you were talking to two of the biggest advocates for short stories as the perfect form, because you write all the major beats of a complete narrative, and you do it again and again and again and again and again and again and again.
It's so easy to spend a month or a year of your life writing 1,200 story beats or 15 perfect planned story beats, and then write 1 chapter and then stop. And that was a waste of everybody's time. So what you do is find 1 beat. What's the best, most important beat? Write that. Write 1. Put that in 1 chapter. What's the most important moment in your character's history? Just put that in there by itself. And if that works, there may be demand for chapter 2, and then write chapter 2. And if that works, write chapter 3.
Fantastic. Let's see. Speaking of endings, do you always write with a particular ending in mind, or are you discovering the ending as you go? Are you a planner or are you a pantser?
Kind of half between the two. I generally have an approximate sort of message / approximate landing site in mind, but exactly where it's going to go, I find that changes over time. As I say, it is an arc, and you have more and more control over the flight, but sometimes things happen and you go, oh, well, I guess we're aiming towards a different thing. A good example of this would be probably about 2/3 of the way through Antimemetics. I had to decide, right, is this going to be a happy ending or a sad ending? Because I could have chosen to end it either way. And I went, it's going to be a happy ending, because I ended the first half of the story on a real downer note. And I decided, right, okay, let's have an upbeat ending. And that shaped various decisions that were made over the back half of the book.
By the time I got halfway through the book, I was like, oh God, how is this going to end? I was so braced.
It is kind of a downer ending, honestly.
Yeah, very much so.
I'm going to assume that everyone here has read the book, but like nearly everybody ends up dead. It's a happy ending, but a lot of people are dead.
I don't even know if you can classify it as happy. There is a successful conclusion to the events.
And then a kind of a Flash Gordon style question mark.
Yeah. That's going to stick with me, right? It's not quite a or did I, but there is a sort of, and now the world will never be the same kind of situation.
But also, like, reflecting on the end, like the final chapter is the epilogue is 058 going, this has happened at least once, at least twice before, and we quote unquote won. Is it going to happen again? Probably. Is it going to keep happening over and over forever? Maybe. What do we need to change so that it never happens again? And he doesn't know what to change so that it never, ever, ever happens again. It might be 100 years, it might be 1,000 years, but it's going to happen again. He thinks.
Yeah.
It's one of the lines in there that haunts me is that the line 058 has about, is this where we need to be?
Yeah.
How far are we from it if it isn't? And that is so nuanced and so subtle, because you're right. It is that kind of array.
I think maybe
kind of be.
Kind of. Yeah, exactly.
And it's so interesting that 058 has those two scenes in which he is so radically different, that he has the kind of very chipper, very kind of determined, congratulations, Bart, this is the rest of your life moment. And then how his arc is so completely sketched out with that interaction and with the final moment. And you can see how he's changed and how the
and he doesn't know why.
And he doesn't know why, but he knows it's there.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely the best kind of haunting. That's really good.
Thank you so much for calling out that one line, because that is one of my favorite lines in the entire thing. It is very important to me. In part, it is, so the nature of the SCP Wiki is that there are long ongoing discussions within the community, like, what is the Foundation? Is the Foundation a good thing or a bad thing? Are they evil? Are they cold but cruel? Are they an unambiguous force for good? Yes, no. And there are, because as we say, there is no canon. It's fine that everybody has different perspectives on this and writes stories with different perspectives. So in part, that line is just kind of turning to camera and going, how do we want to write the Foundation? Like, should it be a force for good or evil or not?
It makes it a question, which I think is really powerful.
Thank you. My feeling personally, as a creator, I'll share this, is that the Foundation, firstly, it's a large enough entity that it may contain multitudes. There are going to be arms of the organization that are trying to do a good job and protect people. And there are arms which are mostly there for self-preservation, because they want to make sure that the Foundation continues to exist. Not humanity, just their part of the Foundation. And there are arms which are doing actively evil things, which the other arms perhaps would prefer them not to be. And maybe there are internal disagreements about this, really dangerous ones. Some idea that I pitched some time ago, which I don't think anyone's ever going to snap up, is like, there could be a Foundation internal civil war. It could fragment into two Foundations with radically different perspectives on what should be done about anomalous stuff.
And turning all of that various technology on itself.
Perhaps. Yeah. A lot of that could be really messy. I would need to think more about what that would give us narratively, though. But it is definitely talking about, like, if we're in control of the world, like, we're obviously not doing a good enough job. So what needs to change?
I'm remembering that discussion we had a couple weeks ago about the idea of the SCP HR department and how they keep becoming aware of candidates that would be qualified for them, but then they disappear, not realizing that there are competing recruiting agencies going after the same pool of candidates. And
was that a story you read or just a pitch you had?
No, it was just an idea we had.
That's a really strong idea. You should. I'll communicate that to the community.
You know, the idea that somebody's trying to investigate where are all the qualified people for these roles. We know they must exist, and if they don't exist, that means shadow versions of our own organization must be recruiting them, and why, and to what end,
Oh, yeah. Someone mentioned, actually, I've got a better answer to a question someone answered earlier. It's like, is there SCPs that you wanted to include but couldn't? Yes. Well, this isn't an SCP, but midway while I was writing this, someone suggested that there could be something called the Counter-Conceptual Division, which would be another Antimemetics division, which is not aware of the first one.
Right.
And vice versa. And I thought that was a banger concept.
And then taking that to the HR idea.
Yeah, I really wanted to find a place to put it into this story, and I couldn't. I really wanted to, but it was going to turn out to be a massive distraction. I had an idea for ending it in this way. I had a thought that maybe the antimemetics division could completely fail, and then the counter-conceptual division just comes out of nowhere and says, well, we've been fighting the same problem, but we actually have a workable solution, so here it is. But that would just be like a horrible, horrible way to end the story.
It's like the Office offcut story, right? There's just one guy in a room somewhere going, where are all those files? Why do I keep seeing this? It's that's such a fun idea. Capitalism is asserting itself again, so I think this might be, actually, I mean, we've run almost an hour and a half, and I want to be respectful. We all need to sleep tonight. So this might be a really good time for you to tell us, like, what's your latest release, and, like, what is it that we should go out and read next?
Right now, before the ad break?
Let's take the ad break first. We'll just take a little short one, and then we'll come right back. So everybody go and take yourself a stretch, get some water. I'm going to need a refill as well, and we'll be right back.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, everybody.
Hello,
We're back. We saw the comment about SCP Magnus crossover, and we started talking about TikToks and how I'm sure there's got to be SCP Magnus crossover fiction already out there. If you find some, send it my way, and I will read it through my covered eyes so it doesn't scare me too badly. Right. So tell us about either what you're working on now or what's just come out and what's coming up next for you.
Further reading. Right.
Further reading. Yes.
Okay. First of all, if you enjoyed Antimemetics, go to the Antimemetics Division hub page on the wiki, scroll down a little bit. You'll find various bits of further reading by people, SCP creators other than myself. So most notably is a side story called What the Dead Know, which another SCP user started writing while I was writing Antimemetics. It kind of runs in parallel and eventually feeds back into it, and perhaps shed some light on certain events which are perhaps a little obtuse as written, but yeah, that's worth a look. And there's other precursor work down there, including SCP-1425, which I've mentioned previously. And there's some further reading, including various things that have already kind of been mentioned. Further stories written by about Marion Wheeler that aren't necessarily by me, and further stories that are anti-memetic but aren't necessarily by me. So get stuck into that. In terms of books by me, stuff by me, yes. So Antimemetics is my second to last book. My current book is called Valuable Humans in Transit and Other Stories. It's an anthology of fiction, all science fiction. It's not SCP related, but this is stories that I've written over the course of several years, going back actually quite a long way, some of them. Wow. But that includes, among other things, the short story Lena, which was extremely well received and is about uploading and what happens to the first person who gets uploaded.
Okay,
it's not pleasant. But,
I have so many tabs open right now. It's incredible.
Okay. All right. It's all right. Yes, so that book is for sale in all of the usual formats. You can buy you can buy an ebook. You can buy an ebook from places other than Amazon if Amazon isn't your bag. But you can also get a paperback or a hardback cover from Amazon.
I definitely want a paperback version of this.
It can be done.
Antimemetics for sure. And in fact, I may send it. Find a way to get it to you in a way that is comfortable for you, so that you can autograph.
We'll have to work on that.
Yeah.
I don't currently offer an autograph service as yet, but who can say?
Yeah, we'll figure something out. That sounds
Ask
good.
me again in a year. We'll see.
Sounds good.
As for what's coming next, I can't talk about that. Something is coming next, but I can't talk about it. I'm sorry.
When do you think you might be able to talk about it more, so that we can
I will probably mention it on Twitter as soon as I have something concrete to talk about.
Oh, sweet.
Other than that, as I say, ask me again in a year. The nature of writing is that the thing is, I've been writing serial fiction online for a very long period of time, where a chapter ideally a chapter per month. In practice, a chapter every 4, 5, 6, 7 months would show up. But I haven't been doing that, as people may have noticed, for some time. There is a reason for that, but the nature of writing is that it's a slow-moving kind of process. It takes a long time to write a long piece of text and then to edit it properly and so on. So that is about all I can say at this point. So
definitely make sure you find Quantum on your social of choice. The link that we have for you is your website and Twitter.
That's fine.
Given what Twitter's done, is there another platform that you think you may decamp to that people should investigate?
I am on Blue Sky.
Okay.
As quantum.org on Blue Sky. I'm not 100% convinced by Blue Sky as yet, although I will say that apparently they do give Antimemetics to their developers as recommended reading.
That's what we've heard, yeah.
Which is flattering, although I can't say I'm sure how useful that is as recommended reading if you're running a social network. It is about ideas, but it's not really about social networking or anything like that.
I am desperate to know the why behind that fact.
I think just because it's about contagious ideas and things like that. The other required reading book is Drill's book, the famous Twitter poster, perhaps you're not aware.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Which is fine, it's very well worth reading.
You're like, I have 1 degree of separation from Drill. There we go.
That's pretty interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, Blue Sky may or may not stick around, but I'm on there for now, to be continued. But honestly, Twitter might or might not stick around, so I'm on there for now. And if either or both of those go under, refer back to my website, quantum.org.
We'll start developing psychics social media profiles or something like that. Who knows? Thank you so much. This has been a brilliant conversation. We've had a great time Chat, I hope you had as much fun as we did, which was an awful lot. And we could do so much more of this, but let's cut ourselves off. We're going to take another little quick break. I know we just had one, but we'll take a very short one just to be able to say goodnight to Quantum. And then we will come back with some shenanigans that may be of a slightly emotional nature. And I'm not quite sure why we just had a whole bunch of random people start following us, but I'll ask the mods to take a look at that. And then you might want to grab yourself a tissue, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Bye-bye.